Okay, so this is where Nassim Haramein comes in. The image on the top right is the best way to describe old physics. And when I say old physics versus new physics, Nassim Haramein presented the unified field theory. And old physics looked at that center sphere as a star. And the weight of that star would be like the weight on a center of a trampoline. And then all the planets would rotate around the edge of that trampoline, just like the sphere going around it. The problem with that is it didn't solve gravity for individual bodies like planets. So before Einstein died, he was pursuing combining the macro physics, so celestial bodies and planets and stars, with the microphysics, so the physics of atoms. And he didn't succeed before he passed away. And that's where Nassim came in. So Nassim has a movie called Black Hole, W-H-O-L-E, like the hole. And I watched it probably 5 or 6 times before I really understood it all. But he tells the story of exactly how it led him to discovering the unified field theory. So when he was 10 years old, he goes into class and his teacher draws on the board a dot. And she says, "This is dimension 0, and it doesn't exist." And then she draws a line of dots, so a line, and this is dimension 1, and it doesn't exist. And then she drew a flat plane and said, "This is dimension 2, and it doesn't exist." Dimension 3 contains volume, and that's where we begin to exist. And his first thought, little 10-year-old Nassim, is, I'm going to fail this class, because how do you have something made of nothing? Like, it didn't make sense to him. So he's just pondering this idea, and he gets on the bus that day, and he can't get it off his mind, so he goes into his mind's eye, and he just begins to float above his body. And the higher he gets, of the people in his body turn into dots, and the vehicles, as he goes higher, turn into dots. The buildings turn into dots. He goes higher, and eventually the planet turns into a dot. And then he looks around, and the stars and planets are all dots around him. So then he comes back into his body, and he begins to look at his hand, and he sees that his hand is made of dots, all these cells. Excuse me. So he shrinks down into his hand to the size of a cell, and he sees the cell is made of dots, the atoms. And so he shrinks down to an atom, and the atom's made of dots, protons and electrons. And he gets back in his body, and he thinks, I think the dot is the only thing that exists. Because if you draw a circle on a piece of paper, that could show an atom or it could show a planet. It's just a perspective. So then he spent 30 years pursuing his theory mathematically. And he mathematically proved what he was pursuing, that the sphere or the dot is the main everything, really. And it just comes in different sizes, essentially. He also found that every sphere contains 2 tetrahedrons within it. And that each one is electric and one is magnetic, and that's what creates the electromagnetic field that exists around everything. It also creates the middle image on the bottom is called the torus, and that looks like a donut, but it's like an energy donut, and the center point is infinitely small. And that is the energetic field that exists around everything, created by the movement of the 2 3-sided pyramids within it. Does that make sense? I know it's a lot of words. Am I losing you guys? I'm trying.
I've had a little bit of this already. I watched Gaia, and I'm
cool.
So a little bit might float over a little bit, because she's from that perspective, but she's willing to.
Over there anyway, so.
I see. Well, I'm filming this so people can review it. I just want to put all this information out so people can begin to learn.
Yeah.
So now every single galaxy, so the Milky Way galaxy and every other one, contains a black hole at the center of it. And that is the center of the spiral that is the entire galaxy. The whole galaxy is spinning, just as the sun is moving through space and the planets are spiraling around it. It's just a smaller version. What he found, so he solved this mathematic equation by approaching the atom with the exact same math we use to solve the black hole, showing that the atom is just a miniature black hole and it just changes in size. It's just a different perspective. And at the center, so that black hole in the center of every atom contains the point of singularity. And this is how energy moves from my perspective, is through the point of singularity. So just as the electron spins around the proton in the center of the atom, it disappears into the center every single time, delivering information back to the point of singularity. The point of singularity is singular. It is one space. It is like the ether, but there are infinite access points to it. So when you have a thought or intention, it doesn't travel across the room. It goes through the point of singularity and manifests within that thing. And that's how energy moves from my perspective. Now, our reality is based on mathematics and geometry. So he needed to find a structure a little more complex than two tetrahedrons or two three-sided pyramids within a sphere. And what he found was the bottom right image, which is called a 64 tetrahedron grid. What this shape does is it's able to geometrically be built within itself and on top of itself. And the only thing it needs is itself. Something that can be built within itself and on top of itself has what is called a fractal condition. So it can fractal bigger and it can fractal smaller. And that's a huge part of the unified field theory, not mathematically just solving the atom and the black hole, but geometrically finding their exact same structure. And that's what that grid is. So if you notice, this grid is made completely of straight lines, and it's three-dimensional. If you hold a light over it, it creates the shape underneath it, which is the flower of life. So that's a two-dimensional structure made completely of curved lines. And the technique of holding a light over a structure like that is called shadowing. And this is how the ancients passed information down. And this is also why the flower of life is found on all of our ancient civilizations, because they had this knowledge, and we'll be getting into that as well. So everything goes through cycles and everything is spinning. We're spinning around the planet, and the sun is going through its own cycle. And the cycle is 26,000 years, and that cycle is called the precession of the equinoxes. So that shape, the precession of the equinoxes, it has two parts. So a light and a dark phase is one way to look at it, or a falling asleep and an awakening phase. 13,000 years ago was when Atlantis fell. And when Atlantis fell, we also fell in consciousness dramatically. About 6,500 years ago, so about another quarter way, we began waking up enough to where we could understand information. And that's when our first civilizations began appearing, Sumeria and Egypt. And now here we are, past point A on that precession of the equinoxes, on the awakening phase. We're headed back towards the center of the galaxy. And we are at the awakening of humanity. And it's just based on the precession of the equinoxes. Now, just as the sun does not sit still in space and we spin around it. The sun is flying through space and planets move around it. And when the precession of the equinoxes happen, we don't come back to the same exact place in space and in consciousness. It's more like a spring-like movement, so we're rising every time. So we've been through this several times, and when we fell, now we can rise higher than where we made it the previous time. Hopefully. I think we can do it. So the visible light spectrum, I know I'm kind of switching through a lot of stuff real quick here, but The visible light spectrum is the human visible light spectrum. So that's just what we see with our two eyes. So if you were to create the visible light spectrum in a 2-foot length, the part that we could see, the entire electromagnetic spectrum. So the visible light spectrum would only be 1/36th of an inch. So all that rest of that is still energy operating and moving through our reality. And just because we can't see it doesn't mean it's not there. So to me, when I learned this, if you only count what you can see, then you'll be very limited. In the sense that if you were a 2-dimensional person living on a piece of paper, then trying to figure out why the line was drawn in front of you would be very confusing. Because I only see the line, and that's the only thing that could be causing it, is that the line appeared, as opposed to everything else that could be causing it.